Hello, I'm Llewellyn Falco, the creator of ApprovalTest. And today I'm going to talk about legacy code because a lot of people want to have good tests for their code, but they already have code and they don't know how to get the test into there. One of the things I do in my day job is legacy recovery, where we go into really bad code and get it under test and then clean it up so it can go back to being maintainable and productive for a client. And I'm going to show you one of the tips I use there with ApprovalTest to quickly get a piece of code under test. We're going to take a look today in the combinations test area. But before I go through all of that, I want to talk about the abstract concept that we're about to do. This comes from Michael Feathers working with legacy code. The idea is we have a block of code here and it's all messy and we don't really know what it does. And so we're going to use what's called a characterization test. And the idea there is we say, hey, we might not know what the code does, but at least we know if we put this stuff into it, this stuff comes out of it. And maybe we can get some sort of locking or preservation of the way the code works by just saying the same inputs produce the same outputs. But of course, it really isn't just one input usually. Usually it's a lot of inputs produce the same lots of outputs. And you just throw a whole bunch of it. And once you get enough stuff, you can feel safe that you can modify that code and you'll know if you've inadvertently broken something. So let's go and see this in practice with a piece of code. So here I have a piece of code for movie night. And here it is, nice and big and ugly, lots of statements, and I don't really know what it does. But that's okay. Fortunately, I can run this. So I could do a very simple approval and just verify the output of calling this. Let's say movie night. And look, it takes a name and an age and a time and a sex and a married status. And let's really quickly create these up. So let's try 3 years old. Let's say I have 2.5 hours and not married. So now I have a bunch of input giving me a bunch of output. And I can run this as a regular approval test. And you'll see here, it gives me some output. Now, the question is this output correct? But fortunately, that's a question I don't even need to answer. I can use the definition of legacy code. This is code that is in production. It is correct by definition, unless I am intentionally trying to change its behavior. Its current behavior is correct. Therefore, I can just approve this right away. And I've already put a kind of locking test. I can run this, and I can run it with .cover. Now, .cover is an added plugin that I'm using here that's going to do code analysis and coverage over my test. So now that I'm using .cover, I can go through here and I can see that indeed some of this code is being covered, but lots of it is not. And so what I want to do, let me turn that off. What I want to do is put in a lot more cases. And I could just create a lot more tests here. But better yet, I can go and say, instead of using this one call, let me use a combination approvals. And let me verify all the results for the recommendations. Now, I'm just going to pass a delegate. So I'm going to need to pass it some parameters as well, the name. But instead of passing it single parameters, I'm going to pass it multiple parameters. Instead of just Falco, an array of Falco, an array of numbers, an array of doubles, an array of booleans, and one more. And now when I run this, I'm going to get very similar results. The only difference is going to be that not only is it going to tell me my output, but it's also going to tell me my input. So you can see here, for this input, I am getting this output. And that doesn't seem that helpful, a little extra granularity. But the beauty of this is I can now say, hey, I would like to test the ages 3, 14, 19, and 30. I'd like to test it with an hour, or an hour and a little over half, 4.5 hours and 9 hours. I can say I want to try it for both sexes and for both marriage states. And now it's going to run all of these combinations into it, and with very little work, I'm going to get a lot more coverage. You can see it has now added all of these situations, all 80 of them. Again, I don't even have to look to see if it's correct. I can use the definition of legacy code to just preserve my results. And now I have a nice and running test that is covering almost everything. Let me run that under .cover one more time just to prove that. Now that I've run it in .cover, you can see that I've gotten all of the tests covered, every path, even though it took me very little work to generate all of these situations and verify all of those results. Of course, once I do this in practice, I tend to leave .cover and actually go to nCrunch. You'll see once I enable nCrunch over here, it starts building my tests, and you can see that everything is working because of the big green OK. But the other thing that will show up are these green dots along the side. And these are going to rerun all the time. So let's just make a very simple mistake here. You'll see, boom, red, saying, hey, stuff is no longer working. So I'm getting very quick feedback on how long it is till I incidentally make something stop working. And this is how I will prefer to refactor this code until I have it into bite-sized pieces that I understand and are easy to maintain. So once again, you have a block of code that you're not sure, and you start throwing in a single input to get a single output. And then with the use of combination approvals, you can throw in lots of inputs to produce lots of outputs by just giving the variations for each field. I'd like to close by highlighting Remco. Remco's out in New Zealand, and he's actually the person who created nCrunch. In the beginning, nCrunch didn't quite work with the approval files very well, so we did a Skype call to work on the problem. And Remco actually helped me to solve that problem. But because it was around Christmas and I was just being a little lazy, I didn't actually go and solve the problem. And about a month later, when I finally got off my butt and went to solve it, I found that Remco had already solved the problem on his side with nCrunch. Because just one of the things he does is keeps nCrunch very good, very tight. It's a tool I really enjoy using when I'm doing any kind of refactoring, and I suggest you check it out as well. Well, as always, if you have any questions with ApprovalTest, tweet them with the #ApprovalTest. I monitor that frequently and will answer you quickly.